For the better part of 2 decades, from the 1980s to the late 1990s, Toys R Us wasn't just a toy store. It was a part of American pop culture. Ask an American where they bought their Christmas present back then, and there's no real competition to name. Surveys at the time had its brand recognition above 90%, and at its peak, the company controlled close to a fifth of every toy dollar spent in America. Thousands of stores, billions in sales, the kind of dominance that feels permanent while it's happening. Then, in 2018, Toys R Us liquidated every one of its 735 US stores and erased roughly 33,000 jobs. One of the most jarring bankruptcies in the history of American retail. A genuine shock to the industry and to millions of customers who had grown up assuming the company would always simply be there. And yet, walk into malls and department stores in America today and you can still find a Toys R Us. In February 2026, a WHP global executive said that the brand had reached 1,664 locations across 35 countries. It's even developing its own movie, which makes this one of the odder stories in modern retail. A company can legally cease to exist, erase 30,000 jobs, and still somehow keep expanding under its own name years later. So what actually happened here? Is the Toys R Us you're walking past today the same one Americans grew up with, or something else entirely wearing its mascot? To understand all the story, let's go back to before Toys R Us sold a single toy. Toys R Us did not start as a toy company. In 1948, fresh out of World War II, Charles Lazarus noticed the birth rate was about to climb when soldiers came home. So he opened a children's furniture store in Washington, D.C., selling cribs, strollers, and changing tables. That, he assumed, was the business. It almost was. Customers kept asking where the toys were, and the ones who bought one came back weeks later wanting another. Lazarus realized furniture was bought once, toys again and again. So he started carrying more toys alongside the cribs and strollers, just to see what would happen. What happened was the market backing him up. Cheap plastic was replacing wood and metal, collapsing toy production costs, but department stores only stocked a real selection once a year, at Christmas. Nowhere sold toys as a serious year-round business. Realizing that, Lazarus dropped furniture entirely, rebuilt the store around toys, and invented Toys R Us with the backward R, the one that looked like kids scrawled. Low prices, wide selection, stock that never ran out all year, not just at Christmas, and he started opening more of them. It didn't take long for other retailers to notice the same gap and try to copy it, which meant Lazarus needed a way to win on cost, not just concept. That took more square footage than any toy store had ever used, and it had to be cheap. So instead of expensive mall real estate, he built next to highways, where space was plentiful and real estate prices was not, turning toy shopping into an errand all its own. That decision swallowed the category whole. Add a mascot, Geoffrey the Giraffe, a jingle a generation of American kids could still hum decades later, and warehouse-sized stores, and no competitor could match it on price and selection all at once. By the 1980s and 90s, Toys R Us was a category killer. Stores built around one thing at a scale nobody else could match. At its peak, estimates put its share of the American toy market between 20 and 25%, and surveys reportedly placed its brand recognition as high as 95%, among the highest of any retailer in the country. Ask an American kid in 1990 where toys came from. There was only one answer. This was a fixture of American childhood, and quietly appreciating underneath it sat hundreds of large properties on prime land Toys R Us owned outright. A company that dominates its category, prints cash, and sits on that much real estate does not stay invisible for long. Other retailers and private equity noticed the same fat margins and wanted a slice of the toy aisle for themselves. But the first real threat didn't come from any of them. It came from a company that didn't even think of itself as being in the toy business. That company was Walmart, and it gave Toys R Us its first real competition in a category it had never lost. Walmart didn't need to be a toy specialist to win. It already sold everything else: groceries, clothing, electronics, household goods, under one roof. And it had trained American families into a single weekly habit: one stop, one cart, one checkout line for the whole list. Toys just became one more aisle inside that habit. In 1998, Walmart passed Toys R Us as America's largest toy seller, pricing toys near cost as a loss leader just to pull parents through the door for everything else. Toys R Us was a destination you had to plan a trip for. Walmart was already where you were. Then came the internet, turning online shopping into a habit. Toys R Us built an independent site, toysrus.com, but the move quietly gave up the one advantage 40 years of stores had built. A customer ordering online never walks the aisle, never meets Jeffrey, never gets the experience that made the brand in the first place. Worse, its supply chain had been engineered for one job: trucking pallets to stores, with no ability to break that down into single boxes addressed to someone's living room. That gap showed up at Christmas 1999. Tens of thousands of orders sat unfulfilled. Thousands of American kids woke up without the gift a parent had ordered weeks earlier. Toys R Us mailed out $100 coupons to apologize, and the FTC fined it $350,000 for missed delivery dates. Having proven it had neither the technology nor the logistics to run e-commerce alone, Toys R Us made its second mistake. It handed the entire problem to Amazon, paying $50 million a year plus a cut of sales, while Amazon ran the website, ordering and shipping, and Toys R Us became its only toy retailer. For a while, it looked brilliant. The best-known toy brand combined with the best e-commerce platform on earth, and toysrus.com became the highest-grossing toy site in the world. But handing Amazon the entire technical front line also meant handing it every customer, every purchase pattern, every lesson in how people buy toys online. Once Jeff Bezos saw how profitable the category was, Amazon quietly broke the exclusivity and opened the toy shelf to competitors. Toys R Us sued and won the right to cancel the contract in 2006. By then, it had spent 6 golden years it could never get back, watching another company learn its own business better than it did. Toys R Us walked into the 2000s carrying every scar from the last chapter, and competition only sharpened. Walmart and Target turned toys into a loss leader, selling near cost because a parent grabbing a discounted Barbie filled the rest of the cart too. Toys R Us couldn't play that game. Toys, and only toys, were the business. There was no other cart to fill. The company tried to cut its way to health, shutting smaller brands like Kids R Us and Imaginarium, just to protect the core. Then the dot-com bubble burst, dragging the economy down, and sales kept sliding. By 2004, the board had put the company up for sale. What arrived a year later was not a rescue. Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, Bain Capital, and Vornado Realty Trust completing a $6 billion buyout in July 2005. KKR and Bain saw a category leader ripe for cost-cutting. Vornado saw 40 years of prime land under Toys R Us stores. None of the three were in the business of selling toys. These private equity buyers were purely in the business of extracting value from assets, targeting everything from the toy inventory to the valuable real estate. Here is the mechanism, because the popular version gets it wrong. More than $5.3 billion of that $6.6 billion price tag was debt, with the buyers putting in only about $1.3 billion of their own money. Toys R Us was made to carry the loan for its own acquisition, and the highway-adjacent land Lazarus had spent 4 decades accumulating became collateral for that debt. The arithmetic was brutal. On roughly $5 billion in debt, interest alone ran close to $400 million a year against a capital budget of only about $250 million to invest in the business. The single largest line item was not stores, not inventory, not the website. It was interest. Which is why the common explanation that Toys R Us forgot how to sell toys does not hold up. Strip out the interest and the company was still profitable, with operating income even growing in its final years. Part of why so many people later assumed something didn't add up. What actually killed it was a capital structure built for a stable decade of retail, dropped into the most unstable decade the industry had ever seen. The cash needed to rebuild its stores and fix its e-commerce was already leaving the building every year, as interest to owners who had never sold a toy in their lives. The bill would not come due right away, but by 2017, the storm had finally hit. In September 2017, Toys R Us filed for Chapter 11, listing roughly $5 billion in debt. The plan, at least on paper, was restructuring, not liquidation. Management believed a strong holiday season could buy enough time to fix the balance sheet. Sadly, it did not. Holiday sales in 2017 came in below what the company needed, and the secured creditors holding its bankruptcy financing decided a rescue no longer penciled out. KKR itself later said publicly that it wanted the company to restructure and survive, but that the creditors calling the shots had a different view. Restructuring was off the table. Liquidation was on it. What happened around that decision is a big part of why so many people still blame private equity by reflex whenever this store comes up, and the specific details do more arguing than any accusation could. 4 days before the bankruptcy filing, CEO Dave Brandon collected a $2.8 million bonus. Several other executives received similar payouts in the same window. Creditors later sued some of them, along with the figures tied to Bain, KKR, and Vornado, alleging they knew the payouts would never survive bankruptcy court and took the money anyway. Meanwhile, the same 3 firms that engineered the 2005 buyout had kept collecting advisory fees off a business that was losing money, fees written into the original deal, growing every year, regardless of performance. Then came the line employees never forgot. Told the company was liquidating, staff were informed their final weeks running the going out of business sales would effectively serve as their severance. There would be no separate payout. Months later, under public pressure, KKR and Bain Capital each pledged $10 million to a hardship fund, $20 million combined, against roughly $75 million that workers said they had actually been promised. Vornado Realty Trust did not contribute anything. By June 2018, Toys R Us in America was gone. Stores liquidated, inventory sold off, assets broken into pieces for creditors to divide. Geoffrey the Giraffe, in every farewell headline, waved goodbye. For a huge number of Americans who grew up humming that jingle in the car on the way to the store, this genuinely felt like childhood itself had been formally discontinued. But there was one asset that never went on the auction block, because no creditor could liquidate it in the way they liquidated shelving and inventory: the name. It was from that single surviving asset, not the stores, not the people, that a strange kind of comeback would begin. So, how does Toys R Us actually exist today, and why do you still see it in malls? After the 2018 liquidation, the only thing left was the name, the trademark, and the iconic Geoffrey the Giraffe. A group of the company's own creditors held onto those assets and folded them into a new entity, True Kids Inc., in 2019. True Kids tried to launch with a couple of small stores and a short-lived e-commerce deal. None of it worked, and by 2021, those attempts had quietly shut down. The real shift came in March 2021, when a firm called WHP Global took control. Founded in 2019 and backed by Oak Tree Capital, WHP's targeted activities include buy the trademark, skip operations, license the name out. Almost the opposite of how KKR, Bain and Vornado ran the company in 2005. That's the actual answer to why you still see Toys R Us in malls. WHP owns the name and licenses it out to retailers who already have the real estate and supply chains for a cut of the sales. In August 2021, that meant a deal with Macy's, growing to 451 shop-in-shop locations by 2022. Toy sales there running about 15 times higher. Impressive until you remember what it's compared against. A toy aisle that barely existed. Macy's runs the shops, Toys R Us supplies the name. So, the honest version. Toys R Us, the retailer, is dead. What exists now is a licensing operation, a name attached to other people's stores and inventory, run by a firm that does this to brands that have run out of road. Less a comeback than survival without being a retailer again. And the risk now sits with whoever licenses the name. If those partners struggle, so does the model. So to close the loop, the old company drowned in debt its owners had loaded onto it. Debt it never chose. And when the bill came due, creditors decided the name was worth more than the company had ever been. They kept it alive by cutting it loose from everything that had threatened it: the stores, the staff, the inventory, the debt, and licensing it out instead. So, is the Toys R Us you walk past today the same one Americans grew up with, or something else wearing its mascot? Closer to the second. The trademark and mascot are real. What's gone is the company itself, the one that owned its stores, employed tens of thousands, and lived or died on its own decisions. What you're looking at now is a name rented out, wearing a familiar face. Which might be a real lesson. Toys R Us has lived through 5 retail eras: furniture warehouse stores, the internet, private equity debt, brand licensing, and underneath all of it is the same pattern. No idea stays still forever, no matter how good it was at the start. What's worth noticing is how it chose to survive, not by rebuilding itself into something that could stand on its own, but by handing its legs to someone else and letting itself get carried. Genuinely smart, and also genuinely fragile, because the moment your legs belong to someone else, so does the decision about whether you keep walking.